Hello Fleet, welcome back to Captain's Academy Episode 5 with your instructor Chase. Today's episode deals with the fundamental question that many new players have, which is, oh my god, what do I do? Where do I go? And this is typically followed by a lot of running around that kind of looks like a chicken with its head cut off. And no animals were hurt during the production of this video, by the way. So today, what I will be doing is dissecting a map and then explaining the reasoning behind going to certain places. So in today's episode, I will be discussing and dissecting the map North. Now let's analyze this map for a minute here. There's a big open ocean here at the 1, 2, and 3 lines. There are a large number of islands on this map, and in these islands there are a whole bunch of channels, and they lead from one base to another. And these are the 4, 5, 8, and 9 lines. The most common mistakes that I tend to see on this map are the battleships that go to the wrong lines, because so many people have this weird feeling, I guess, that their battleships are just invincible battle wagons, and they're not. And that causes people to end up going to places they shouldn't go. The next group of ships that tend to make a lot of mistakes on this map are destroyers, because people have this weird idea that destroyers are like light tanks, and that they're supposed to be running down flanks and stuff. And that's only at most partially true. The destroyers on a map like this can set up ambush points at multiple places, and those ambush points would deny access to that area to enemy vessels. Common mistakes I see from the cruisers usually involve not escorting things or not playing their ship's strength properly. So for example, American cruisers, in a lot of cases, run off by themselves and they leave their battleships out to dry. And of course, those battleships get hammered by the aircraft carriers and an entire flank collapses. I've seen Imperial Japanese cruiser drivers do the other thing, which is then they go with the battleships, and then instead of helping the battleships with anti-air, they run off into the enemy's lines trying to drop their torpedoes against enemy battleships, and of course get very, very quickly sunk because Japanese cruisers have these massive glass jaws. And finally, carriers are not without blame. A lot of carrier drivers think that their only jobs is to shoot down enemy planes and bomb stuff with their torpedo bombers and dive bombers. And that's only 2/3 of a job. The last third of the carrier's job is to gather intelligence. And that's one of the biggest flaws that I see, is that at the beginning of a battle, a lot of carriers just send up a plane and have them circle above their own carriers until they can get every plane up. By that time, your entire team has no idea where the other team is moving to, which makes it extremely difficult to actually go and set up some kind of attack or ambush or something like that. So carrier drivers really have to think about gathering intelligence for their team. So how do we actually help these players, and how do we get better? And that's sort of a big question that we have to answer. Well, let's say you're a battleship driver here. Take a look at this map and then look at your own ship. You're in a battleship. You have good guns, you have these long range guns that you can hit really, really far away, but you're not that fast and you turn kind of like a floating brick. So would it really be that smart to go to the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines? No, there's so many islands there that one wrong move and next thing you know you're beached. And by the way, when you're a battleship and you're beached, you're like the easiest target for anything that's firing torpedoes. So typically as a battleship, the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines are not places you want to be. Where you would like to be on a map like this is the 1, 2, 3 lines. Why? Well, you've got massive ocean to turn around in. You've got the ability to use your range without any kind of thing blocking you off. If I'm in a battleship, I almost always exclusively go to the 1, 2, 3 line. But that doesn't mean that I'm not adaptable. If I see that there's a need for me to go somewhere else, I will. But you also realize that the whole turning around thing isn't really the job of a big slow battleship. Now let's talk about the 10 line, because the 10 line is the one thing I haven't talked about yet. The 10 line is a weird line. It's not great for battleships, but if a fleet was to go there, it's good defensively. The 10 line is not a very good offensive line, so meaning you can't really go on the offense from the 10 line. And that mostly is because of that massive island you see in the 8 and 9 line there. At the E9 and F9 points, those are ideal ambush points for destroyers with torpedoes. If you were to go up the 10 line in a battleship, all the destroyer has to do is pop up from there, pop smoke, turn their ship around, and launch a wave of torpedo into your side, and there's nothing you can really do because, well, you can't really maneuver. Again, the same problem with being a floating brick. So let's move on to another class of ship. What about carriers? Well, carriers have a very interesting role. One, I've already said their job is to gather intelligence and things like that. But what about the bombers of a carrier? And that's usually a question that a lot of people have. What do I do with my bombers? Well, don't just go and hit any random target, okay? That is not a smart thing to do. What you want to do with carriers is one of two things. Either A, find the high value isolated target, the crazy new BB who decides that he or she doesn't need any kind of cover. You can definitely take that person out of the game as a carrier. The other way to use your carrier is to attack the things that are most likely to affect your team. That means A, the enemy carrier, or B, let's say you see a battleship line and they're heading towards the 1, 2, 3 line. There's 3 battleships. And your team has 3 battleships and they're also heading to the 1, 2, 3 line. What you can do is try to hit one of those battleships, either the one in the front in the leading position or the one at the back. Now, if you can hit one of those battleships for either massive damage or let's say you even are good enough to kill them, then you have just turned the fight in your team's favor and your battleships can now push through. So that's kind of the role of the carrier, and the carrier really has, I don't know, let's say an overall very strategic kind of role, and you have to analyze the situation, decide where to hit. You got to pick your targets very carefully. Cruisers are now very, very interesting for this kind of map. If I was to play an American cruiser, I would most likely stick with my battleships and head towards the 1, 2, 3 line. One, because my AA is phenomenal and I can knock planes out of the sky like they don't matter. And two, of course, that if there are any other ships that come and decide to approach, especially other smaller ships like DDs or cruisers, then my American cruiser can handle it with guns. But, the American cruisers also have a very interesting role. They have to be able to pay attention to the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines. Because if they see an enemy push coming from those lines, it is the American cruiser's job to turn around and head back to guard the actual cap, not the battleships. The battleships are way too slow. The battleships are probably better just to head straight up and continue pushing for the enemy spawn. But what about the Imperial Japanese Navy cruisers? Well, the Japanese Navy cruisers have an interesting role on a map like this. I would typically say that as a Japanese cruiser, I would play the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe the 9 lines. And that's primarily because the the Japanese cruisers have almost the role of like a destroyer support ship in a way. They've got the torpedoes, which they can add to the destroyers in order to knock out large targets, but they also have those bigger guns that allows them to deal with surface targets, so other destroyers and other cruisers from the enemy team that decide to come up one of the channels. Now, the Japanese cruisers have, I guess, one other thing over just the destroyers they're supporting, which is that little scout plane. Now, destroyers themselves don't have scout planes, so they'll never know what's behind an island. So let's take for an example, you're ambushing people at F7, and you've got, let's say, 2 destroyers and you there. Well, you have no idea what's actually at E7. Could there be enemy destroyers there, or an enemy cruiser? There's no way to know. So what the Japanese cruiser that's supporting the 2 destroyers at F7 can do is launch its scout. And this will reveal what's going on in maybe the E7 square, and then that'll give the ships around you a chance to analyze the situation. If, let's say, there is nothing there, there's no smoke cloud, no ship, no nothing, then it might be a wise way to push up, into that channel and up the channel and towards the enemy base, and then actually start to cause the enemy to turn back from the 1, 2, 3 lines in order to re-engage. So these are sort of all valid strategies as an IJN cruiser, but remember, their cruiser's biggest punch come from its torpedoes, and torpedoes, especially the shorter range ones, don't really want to be engaging things in the open seas. You're too easy of a target. Stick to an area where you can actually lay an ambush and execute it successfully. And of course, finally, we get to destroyers, because destroyers are the ships and that lay ambushes and are probably the masters of stealth and ambush. Well, on a map like this, what you're looking for in a destroyer is a narrow channel where ships will go through, where they have very, very little place to actually maneuver. So these places exist on this particular map at these following points. You have one at E5, you have one at F6, you have one at F7, you have another one at E7, and you have 2 points at E9 and F9. While other points may work, these points really cut off access to a certain channel. And you can actually use your torpedoes really to prevent ships from coming down that area. Now, of course, this is not going to stop people from trying, because I've seen it way too much where BBs just go straight down the 8 line thinking that they're invincible. And so, if you are able to lock down a channel, not only are you doing your team a massive favor, you can also gain quite a lot of experience and quite a lot of damage. So, 10 full minutes later, what have I really done? Well, I've hoped that maybe for some of the beginners I've given you some early strategies and tactics that you can use. But really what I've hoped I've given you is a framework for you to start thinking about things. So what I want you all to do now is really to spend some time and really think about your own ships. Start to weigh their pros, their cons, and then think about where can you use the pros of your ships and minimizing the cons. So where can you really utilize the strengths while minimizing your weaknesses? And then from that analysis, look at the maps you're playing and then create sort of your own tactics, your own strategy on how to help your team really win the battle. Because at the end of the day, the most important thing is not really personal glory. That's not what a naval combat game is about. At the end of the day, it is actually about helping your team win. And that's all, folks, for this particular episode of Captain's Academy. Hopefully, you've all been able to gain some ideas on how to think about your ships and the maps that you're playing, and to create sort of the biggest advantages for yourself and for your team. Now, if you like what I'm doing, don't forget to like and subscribe, as I'll be making more videos in the upcoming days and weeks. If you have suggestions, please leave those in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to try to make more videos about the things that you're suggesting. Now, I do have to apologize for maybe at times in the video sounding a little bit incoherent or maybe just a little bit long-winded. I was up until about 6:30 a.m. last night trying to get this video finished so I could get it uploaded for all of you, but I never actually managed to make it there as I sort of passed out at my computer. So my sincere apologies for that. Aside from that, I hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day, and I'm looking to seeing more of you on during the next Twitch stream and also on the high seas.